Mr. Speaker, we have currently in the United States 3 constitutions. We have the 0% Constitution. That's the one that's in Washington. The 0% Constitution is when they ask the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, under what constitutional authority did you pass the bill to invade into health care? And her response was, "Are you serious?" In Washington, we have a 0% Constitution. In fact, they don't even look or debate anymore as they used to what the constitutional provisions are for their actions. They simply act because they can, and the Supreme Court upholds what they're doing. We also have a 6/7 Constitution. That's the Constitution where only 6 of the articles should we consider to use. And under 6/7 of the Constitution, we effectively get the 0% Constitution. Because if we're looking at 6/7, then there is no effective check on the 0% Constitution that is happening in Washington every day. And then, of course, we have the 100% Constitution. And I agree with the representative from Draper. We need to reaffirm the 100% Constitution. We need to not be severed from our roots, and we need to reinstill the principles of our 100% Constitution. Because if we don't, we get this. We get the 0% Constitution by default. Doing nothing means agencies will continue to take over water, enacting law, executing law, adjudicating law by unelected agencies. Will continue to get presidents that enact law with the pen. We get a court that enters into the playing field of public policy if we continue with the 0% Constitution. One thing that the representative from Draper said that I have to really take issue with, he mentioned the Mount Vernon Assembly as somehow of means that were inappropriate. There were a number of us that were there. The only reason there was a limit, it was the very first time that people got together to discuss process. It had nothing to do with this particular movement of an amendment, but to discuss process. And the reason it was limited is because that's all the chairs they had. The Mount Vernon Library is only so big, and it was first come, first serve. Anyone that wanted to be there logged in, and they were there. And we began this process of discussing what would this procedure look like. I'm so proud of the representative from St. George who was here in this body as our delegate, and we learned a great deal from that. When we were here with delegates from around the nation, one of the things that we learned, Mr. Speaker, there were Republicans and Democrats in that assembly, and there was a gentleman, a senator from Ohio, Bill Patman, African-American gentleman, Democrat from Ohio, who was in that assembly. And through the proceeding, he distinguished himself so effectively in how he carried himself and argued the issues and worked with his colleagues. I don't think there's a single person in that body that would not vote for him to be chairman of the next assembly. Leaders rise to the top. That's what happened in Annapolis before we ever got to Philadelphia. Leaders rise to the top. And in Utah, we have the opportunity to be leaders among leaders. In the Transportation Committee this morning, the good senator from Utah County mentioned the Constitution was established from east to west. It should be saved from west to east. We have the opportunity, knowing what we know, to be leaders among leaders. Now, in the process, in our Federalism Commission, we're going to be going through how we carry what we do into a convention of states to propose amendments, that we have our own strategy and we choose our delegates. Imagine the delegates we could choose. Senator Mike Lee, good representative from St. George, a good representative from Grantsville, distinguished legal minds. Our Senate president, who sat right up there in this assembly of state legislatures and conducted himself so well with esteem among people across the nation. Our young, scrappy, and hungry speaker here, who would go and battle for our state and the rights of our state. Think of the delegates we could send. Now, as we send delegates, they're our agents. They are agents of the state. Like any agency relationship, we can call our agents home. We give them specific instructions. And in fact, we already have a law in Utah. If our agents violate the scope of the agency that we give them going to a convention, it's a crime in Utah. This is a serious matter, but yet the impacts that we have in our nation are also tremendously serious. The representative mentioned the climate in our country. We have an African-American president. We have two leading candidates for president that are Hispanic. When they talk about the rich and the powerful behind closed doors in Washington buy their favors by the minute. Our good Senator Mike Lee called it the dysfunctional favor bank. Our good colleague from South Jordan mentioned that in the omnibus bill just last month, a $2 trillion omnibus bill with 11,000 earmarks that are simply trading favors with the tax dollars of your constituents. When we talk about the poor, those on fixed incomes, their life and their livelihood is being traded away in Washington by the minute. We had just $2 trillion worth of it just a couple of months ago. The representative from Salt Lake mentioned our oath. He mentioned that the original convention was somehow run away in Philadelphia. Nothing could be further from the truth, because they didn't have a constitution at the time. They had an Articles of Convention that was not working. They met as states under their plenary sovereign power as states. And in fact, James Madison says the power of the convention ought in strictness to be determined by an inspection of the commissions given the members of their respective constituents. He then spends the balance of Federalist 40 proving that the delegates from all the states properly followed their directions. To think that the first act of our country was somehow ill-gotten or inappropriate, I find that to be misguided. The application sets the agenda. When 2/3 of the states call the convention, those applications set the agenda. Think about what we are facing in our nation. Not just a balanced budget that the representative from Draper said, not just whether we increase spending to balance the budget, but fiscal restraints. We have the opportunity, think about that, we have the opportunity to discuss fiscal restraints where 30% of our state revenue is dependent on a federal government that itself every year says is broke. To discuss the totality of how do we bring into balance in a reasonable fashion fiscal restraints. We have the opportunity to discuss whether or not to propose amendments on the jurisdiction of the federal government. The representative from Draper said that that's so open-ended. It's not. It's a one-way street. To discuss limits, not up. The 0% Constitution has given us increased jurisdiction of the federal government for 100 years. And we'll continue to get increased jurisdiction of the federal government under the 0% Constitution. Under the 100% Constitution, we get to discuss limits and restore that balance, which Madison said in Federalist 45, that the balance, when they divided power, was to be few and defined at the federal level and numerous and indefinite closest to the people. Imagine the opportunity to discuss limits, to get back to that balance that Washington said, if it be wrong in any particular, let it be changed by an amendment, but not by usurpation. And then we also get to discuss whether or not life tenure on the Supreme Court. When we have 4-4 now, we don't know what the Second Amendment looks like next year. We don't know what marital relationships look like next year. We don't know what education looks like next year. We don't know what agencies exercising their power over water and power and our energy looks like next year. Because that's where our Supreme Court sits right now. Imagine the opportunity to discuss limits. Mr. Speaker, history, in fact, does have its eyes on us right now. We have a power, and as the representative from Salt Lake said, we swore an oath to all 7 articles. And we have a power, and with that power comes a choice. With choice comes responsibility. But not to choose is to choose. And history does, in fact, have its eyes on us. Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I would very much encourage your support that we can, in Utah, be leaders among leaders as we go forward in this. Thank you.